Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues. My name is Jatin Nathwani. I'm the Executive Director, Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy. Welcome to WISE Energy Day. This is an event we hold once a year to bring together people from around the campus and industry. You may be a bit surprised. We had 200 and some odd registrations. The room doesn't look like 200 odd registrations. We had to turn people away to say we're, but I assume the room will fill up as the day goes along. Before we begin the session, I would like to make this acknowledgement, the territorial acknowledgement. The University of Waterloo, including the Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge campuses, is situated on the Haldimand tract land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River and is within the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Again, it's my pleasure to welcome you, and what we have done this year is something unusual, and I'll introduce the panels in a moment. But we also decided that we are an institute that promotes truly the notion of multidisciplinary research and being able to move out of the silos of whether it's departments and faculties to begin to touch realms of knowledge and inquiry, and it is at the edge that things really begin to develop into promising solutions for societal problems that are unique and difficult. And in that spirit, this year we have coordinated with our other sister center institutes, one nanotechnology, that will be the next session, and bioenergy, with the CBB, which is a later part in the afternoon. So all this in the spirit to try and get cross-collaboration, not only within and across departments and faculties, but also through institutes that promote very specific agenda with respect to their areas of domains of interest. Having said that, let's begin with panel one, and you are in the hands of some true professionals here. This is the panel that will address the challenge of energy services delivery, and you might say, well, what's that all about? This is how electricity gets to your house, and there has been a traditional approach to the organization of the utilities that has brought electricity to your house, to businesses and industry. But there is a changing of the guard in play here. The whole range of new innovative technologies are beginning to put pressure on the entire industry structure and regulatory arrangements that have been in place for about 100 years. And so we will share with you what are these developments, what are the complexities, where is the world actually going with respect to how your electricity service will arrive at your doorstep. And in that spirit, I will introduce the first speaker, Raymond Tracey. Ray is responsible for the development and integration of Essex Power Corporation and its 3 subsidiaries into a successful regulated and a non-regulated business. Essex Powerline, Essex Power Services, and Essex Energy. Ray was appointed and served 2 terms as the distribution representative to the technical panel on the ISO, Independent Electricity System Operator, which is responsible for the day-to-day operation of Ontario's electrical system. Ray is also a member of the Ontario Energy Board's Forum Planning Steering Committee. Ray served as the chair on the board of the Electricity Distributors Association for the period 2015 to 16, and currently director of the EDA board. He currently serves as the chair for the EDA Western District, comprising 9 LDCs representing nearly 400,000 customers in Southwest Ontario. Ray is past chair and current board member of the UtiliSmart Corporation, which is a leading-edge digital energy services company. President and CEO of Essex Power. Ray, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. I guess I don't need to worry about that, so just maybe push the mic off to the side. All right. And I'm going to kick off by just hitting the first button, I take it? All right. Okay, second button. All right. So my presentation is a little bit of what I believe is the changing of the guard as it relates to energy services in Ontario and really energy services across the world. And our corporation is interesting because it lives in both those worlds. It lives in the regulated world and it lives in the unregulated world / the private sector. And what that means is by living in both those worlds, you start to understand how often there's lots of opportunity between private sector and what I would call monopoly regulated businesses, government, crown corporations. At the same time, there's a lot of opposing pressures and the way they actually act and move and react to needs of customers, communities, and other. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story we're having right now with respect to DERs. And my view is coming from the perspective of the regulated side of our businesses in the sector within Ontario, and typically what we see across North America in terms of the traditional model versus what I really think the new model is going to look like. And we have two choices. We need to figure out how to work together really fast and collaboratively and to extract the value of new innovation between the old and the new. So when I say the distributed energy resources train is leaving, it is left. It is left the train. Technology is developed today to allow customers to have choice that don't require the traditional model. It doesn't require an LDC or a utility, a transmission provider, an ISO, a crown corporation, a government. Customers can make choice without all of these players. So who are the traditional players? And this reference will be typical for Ontario, but you could pretty well replicate this anywhere in North America. You have the province. Their responsibility is to set policy with respect to energy for us Ontarians and provide a path forward for the industry to move towards in order that Ontarians are served to the best of our abilities. But typically, that's in a way that looks at the broader picture of everyone's needs, everyone wants. So when we start designing systems and technology and infrastructure, it's taking a more holistic approach, a bigger view approach. And sometimes the isolated customer gets lost in that process. The IESO, the market operator, we call them. Think of them as the airport control, where they're monitoring where all the planes go. Their job is to monitor where generation is coming into the system, where load is going through the system, and ensure there's adequacy of supply. You also have the Ontario Energy Board, and they'll oversee the role that all the monopoly players play in Ontario. Roles like our LDC Essex power lines, roles like Waterloo North LDC here that probably is the service provider to this campus, role to Hydro One transmission, role to every generator, oversight of the IESO. So the Ontario Energy Board has a lot of say about how we run our businesses and how we actually spend our money. So when we talk about a unique customer's needs, and typically these customers' needs are yesterday, not tomorrow. And if those needs don't fit the traditional model we have today and what we offer, that process to meet those needs can be quite lengthy. So what's happening in Ontario right now? Well, as you can see, it started with probably our transition to retire coal, which was an ambition of a previous government, and probably create Admiral. At that time, if you remember, I think if you've been around long enough, we used to have these things called smog days in Ontario. I think from a holistic approach, Justine did a good job of explaining that energy is more than just energy. It's more about turning the lights on, running the motors, creating a proper environment to live or to have a building operate in. It's about the social issues that we face and using energy. In this case, the social issue was we wanted a cleaner supply in Ontario. In that decision-making process, and the way the traditional model works. We had to make a lot of assumptions about the go-forward supply mix for Ontario and how we would do that supply mix and how we were going to clean it up, how we were going to retire coal, which at that time I believe maybe represented 30% of the overall supply mix. So in a very short period of time, on our very rapid, change of the supply mix in Ontario, we made a lot of commitments towards new technologies as well as existing technologies, those being nuclear refurbishment, new technologies being like solar, wind, bio generation, conservation, new conservation programs to say the best kilowatt hour is the one you don't use. So we had to ramp up all these programs, and ramping up all these programs, the cost structure in Ontario changed. In fact, it doubled, right? And today, while it looks like it may be plateauing, it's probably plateauing under a policy point of view because of what we call the Fair Hydro Plan. And I'll talk a little bit later about that. Because price signals is what drives market space. Price signals is what typically drives where innovation goes with a solution set. So where's the opportunity? Now I've kind of put your traditional DERs that are already in the marketplace here. I guess top left that you'd be looking at, that's your storage systems that now are available. So now these renewables that sometimes aren't predictable, you can marry them up with the solar panels underneath that storage system or a wind system or any other system where you can't have a defined amount of kilowatts available during the defined interval. And between those two solutions, you could pretty well mimic any other traditional generation system that's operated with a supply-demand mix. And then you have EVs coming on board, which means we could have a change in the supply needs, meaning loads shifting could be occurring across the province, where peaks today may be at the time when people get home from maybe supper, maybe middle of the afternoon, till we could see low peaks shifting to late evening, maybe even middle of the night, who knows, depending on how many EVs decide they want to charge and when they want to charge. In the bottom right-hand corner, you have now new fuel cell technology. Technology where they have designed the complete plant right there with the capability to supply at demand the end user's load. Those are all the technologies and many more that are coming at us and exist today. So how do we move forward with DERs? Typically, most DERs, end user DERs, in this case I'm showing you a modular CHP unit, comes in a container, can be dropped out of site, installed within about 6 weeks and provide 1 megawatt load to a customer. So example, this campus, we could drop 10 of these containers, and within 6 weeks you could be island without a need of a supplier. You have to worry about redundancy, you have to worry about a number of factors that go with that, but in principle, that's how quick the marketplace can change. The question is that what we want? Do we want island technology not connected to the traditional grid? Or do we want a more intelligent system where we're maximizing the benefits that we've all paid as Ontarians into the traditional assets we have here in Ontario and that exist across North America, and marry that with the new technology and find a way of value that benefits the end-use decision by customers as well as all of us as a whole? Because the path forward is pretty well set that traditional models for creating new supply, large-scale generation, is going to be very difficult. So, I guess with that little click, you see a little bit of the plug being connected, and I guess you see it being some color into that. And this is where we believe we have to be. We have to find a connected model. The grid needs to be the pipe, similar to the internet, where we don't care about the flow. We don't care about whether we're delivering power or we're receiving power, but we're enabling technology, wherever it may be, whether it be a load, a generation, a DER, in such a way we can maximize the benefits of this new innovation. Traditional model, why do we exist? Why were we built? Why did this 100-year-old industry not really change over 100 years? Pretty well because it was 0.9999 or 99.99% available. And until the digital age, until the want of phones, computers, and the digital world, 99.99 was pretty damn good. Didn't really disrupt our lives. You know, we were happy with, you know, only having short outages. And in Ontario, we could be quite proud. We're probably, in some cases, 5 nines in some areas. So in most cases, the marketplace, the customer was quite satisfied with the delivery model. What has changed with that delivery model is the need for almost 100% power all the time. The other thing that's changed in the traditional model, even though we're 99.99, what we don't have control over is what you see here, Mother Nature. Ice storms, hurricanes, tornadoes. Essex Power, my company, servicing 4 small communities in southwest Ontario, 30,000 customers. In my career there at Essex Power alone, I've seen 3 tornadoes touch down in our service area. 3. All having different scales of impact. So the traditional model now, if you look at it from the end user standpoint, isn't as robust as they see it now, because they understand that out of our control, weather patterns are changing. These type of incidences, no matter how well, how much we spend, how well the system is redundantly built, you could have this happen down your street or in your community. And all of a sudden, the end user and us as a provider have some real issues to deal with in a short period of time. Obviously, Ottawa's a good example of that recently. So today's users are saying, hey, I like my traditional supply, but I can't go 7 days. I can't have my house flood. I can't lose 40% of the value of my most precious asset, my home, have a flooded basement. You know, it's just not acceptable. Or I got to somehow protect myself against that risk. So your first generation DERs that were used for backup purposes, they were typically a diesel-based DER. All your major health facilities, all your major school systems, all your major public infrastructure providers, sewer, water, they all would have some level of DERs. Within the technology world, IT world, you would have what you call UPSs, right? So if you had a computer-based service company, you would have a full-scale UPS capable of keeping your systems or servers up for a period of time till you could properly shut them down and wait for power to be restored if your generator doesn't kick up soon enough. So that was very common, and it exists all across this province. If you remember the blackout back in the 80s, there was a lot of customers that had their generators and a lot that did not have generators. And what we saw directly after that blackout, the marketplace for standby generation flourished for 10 years. Flourished. Customers realized that without power for a sustained period of time is not sustainable for them. We need a better model. So here's what you have. You have our traditional industry, and I live in both these worlds. So obviously the turtle and the hat there, which is a utility hat, is we move. And we don't move at a slow pace because we just want to move at a slow pace. And I'll give you an example. If I want to make a decision on how to change my supply parameters to my customer, I have to go through about 2 or 3 different agencies to get that approval. You have to go for your normal board approval. In our case, I have to go for regulatory approval with the OEB process. And it could even lead us up to policy changes where we need the government involved. Every one of those agencies don't move that quick. They have a purpose and they have a validity in the market space, but we're not there to immediately react. Now, innovation, that's a different story. Watch the auto industry right now. Largest player in the automotive industry today, and with the highest growth rate, is not even an automotive manufacturer 20 years ago. Tesla. 20 years ago, they weren't even a player in vehicles production. Now they're obviously number 1 in EVs. What we're seeing is every major automotive maker trying to catch up. Why? Tesla moves fast. Others will move fast. You know what Tesla's biggest problem was? They never were used to making cars. Production facilities, the mega factory. It wasn't their technology that was failing. It was their ability to produce. Who knows how to produce? The automotive companies. So there's the paradigm you have, right? Innovation moving fast, delivering the end solution. Traditional players, even automotive players like GM, Chrysler, and Ford, Nissan, Volkswagen, they're the traditional model of automotive making, right? They didn't see it coming. They didn't see the innovation moving at that faster rate. Probably North America is the only district that's has the highest uptake of EV vehicles. Why? Because we believe there's a paradigm on the distance that an EV vehicle needs to travel. And we're traditionally, our culture is different. It's aligned with GM, Chrysler, and Ford because that's the comfort you see when you watch football on Sunday, right? That's the traditional model of car manufacturing. But it's changing at a fast pace. So island mode is becoming a new thing. And the thing is, typically in the island mode is, well, the traditional model, you still have one device. You have one failure mode there. You're in trouble, end user. I think you need to be connected to the grid. And that's the story I want to tell them. Let's work together. Yes, you maybe need behind the meter technology. We want to support that technology. But I don't think island mode is the way to go. So their answer to us is, I'll just put 2 of those in. Right? So we better not. So our play can't be, well, you're in trouble if you fail, and we're going to be there. We're not going to be there for you. He'll say, oh, I'll just make myself more redundant. Right? So the pitch isn't one of threat. The pitch isn't us or them. In my industry, the pitch has to be collaboration. The pitch has to be that we're going to change the way we want to function, do our business, offer services. And our services is not about simply reliability. The discussion today about DERs and what customers choose behind the meter for an end-use energy solution is not just simply reliability. Today, this is one of our, on a commercial side, one of our installations that we've done. Net metering solution provided in Ontario. It's a market mechanism. And today, based on current market prices, some of these market prices actually dampen because of their hydro plan, meaning the end users is not actually seeing the true price and value of electricity. And we can provide an end user solution that saves them cost. Ours is the green line, the red is the market. So technology is already beating on price. So while we have simply focused on 99.99%, that's not the pitch that we can use anymore with our customers. Reliability is still important. It's intelligence that is what we need to provide. Intelligence to the end user so they can make a better choice with us on how to use their end user asset. Yes, they maybe primarily want to use it for their needs, but what if I can offer them a benefit or a solution with the market such that we can benefit us as well and other customers? Maybe one neighbor has a cool technology and he's supporting the local grid. So how are we going to use our technology to our advantages and our intelligence? There's 3 main areas that we're focused on. Some of these is what actually comes out of the work that you guys do at a university. You're developing the latest technology. You're developing the latest way to use artificial intelligence. We're trying to take a combination of what the new grid needs to look like. It needs to be intelligent. It needs to be smart. So now, anymore, I just don't worry about the traditional supply of load and how much load does it take to deliver, to a community. How much load do I need to be prepared for to deliver to Waterloo today? 10 megawatts of power. I need to know its load curve, along with a bunch of other customers maybe supplied at this university. We need to know more of that. What if this university decides to self-generate? What if they want to push power back on the grid? How would that change the way I want to operate? How can we create the benefits that we need between your technology and our technology? Self-healing grids. I don't know if that's cut off at the top. It is in my slide. Self-healing grids. 99.99 is not good enough. We need to figure out a way to improve that by using local resources. Artificial intelligence. This is how we make the grid operate and work faster and allow you to make decisions and us to make decisions in a real-time mode, not next day or next hour. So today, we traditionally supply power to homes. This is an illustration of a couple bulk feeders in my area. But really what we have to be prepared for is to connect the renewable generation, the EV charging stations, the storage systems, and do that in a way that I don't just have to go and just keep replacing wire and cables, but intelligently use all this information to know how to manage my grid in a different way. So I'm not out there just replacing poles and wires and cables, but using data to how to manage the system differently so we can maximize the utilization of the load we're servicing plus the DERs that exist in our grid. That's our challenge today. So today's load shape, and this is actually one of our feeders, so you give example. That's what I see today. So 6,000 represents 6,000 kilowatts, fairly small feeder. That's what I would see today looking at the load curve for on that feeder today that I'm managing. But really what makes up that load curve, that's all I'm seeing is the end result. The visibility I have is usually at the station level. All I see is a peak load of just over 6,000. What I don't start seeing is things like the embedded solar that's producing on that system, that's influencing that load curve, the embedded wind, embedded storage, embedded EV charging, and actually the load I'm servicing is really just over 10,000. So if I design my system thinking that I'm supplying 6,000, what happens when all those other resources aren't available? And all of a sudden my load jumps to 10,000. That's the issue of the ISO, that's the issue as a local grid provider, is we can't build and design all these different load curves. It'd be inefficient. Infrastructure is expensive to build. So we have to find a way using information to help direct what we want to do on that grid and where we want to use these resources and at what time. Then we have to influence the customer to move in those directions. So we feel the intelligent grid that integrates with DERs is the win-win that Ontario needs. And it's like anything. I say that if you look at, I think Bell would be probably the best example. You don't see too many hardwired cables going to the home anymore, right? We're all about data or solutions, providing information flow back and forth. We were traditionally involved with simply delivery of load. And it's going to take intelligence for us to be able to execute that same model of service to all the DERs that will exist in our grid. And it's in our best interest that we work together and we get on this train versus let the train pass us by. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray, for setting the context and, in essence, highlighting what is afoot now, disruption of the sector in ways we had not anticipated, and the world is going to be very different from what it has been. And we will take questions after we finish with all the panelists. But now I would like to call upon our next speaker, Brian Rivard. He's an adjunct research professor at the Business Economics and Public Policy at the Ivey School at the University of Western Ontario. Brian Rivard is also Director of Research for the Ivey Energy Policy and Management Center in the Richard Ivey School of Business at Western. His area of expertise and study is electricity market design and regulation. Brian has experience as an energy consultant, most recently as the principal at the Charles River Associates. He worked for the ISO, Independent Electricity System Operator here in Ontario, as the Director of Markets. While working at the ISO, Brian was actually responsible for providing analysis of the impacts of changes to the ISO market rules, market design, government policies, and other industry initiatives. For almost 15 years at the ISO, he helped support the development of the market-based approach to managing the Ontario's electricity system needs. In addition, Brian spent 6 years as a senior economist with the Canadian Competition Bureau. He has written articles in various publications such as the Energy Journal, Canadian Competition Record, Antitrust Law, and so on. He received his MA and PhD in economics from Western. So I'd like to call upon Brian to make the remarks. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Ray. That was great. That was really exciting. I think some of what you've talked about today is going to integrate with some of the theme of my talk. I should figure out how to use this, right? There we go. Excellent. So what I'm going to talk about today is based on a paper that I wrote, and it's available at the Ivey website. It's called Don't Leave Me Stranded, What to Do with Ontario's Global Adjustment. And how many people here, we heard Ray talk about the global adjustment. How many people here know what the global adjustment is? This is a pretty informed audience. So it looks like a lot of people actually don't know what the global adjustment is. That's not surprising because anybody I talk to and they see their electricity bill don't know what the global adjustment is. There's a lot of a lack of information about complex structures that we put in place in Ontario. So let me try and give you a little bit of background on the global adjustment and then talk about what that might mean for some of the innovation issues that Ray talked about earlier. So the focus of my discussion topic is really about the issue of how we have these new cost-competitive, distributed energy technologies, distributed technologies coming about. And what this is doing is it's creating consumer choice that never existed before. Consumer choice around these new technologies versus what Ray described as the traditional grid. Historically, if you wanted electricity, if you had needs to use energy and electricity was the source of energy that you're going to use, the only option really was to get it from the grid. That's changing. There are going to be much more opportunities to choose something other than the traditional grid in the future. And from my perspective, this is a good thing. The pace of this adoption, however, will depend on a lot of things, technological advance, etc. But one of the things it will also depend on is how we price the traditional grid services or how we design rates around that. If we're not careful, and we design these things inefficiently, these rates and pricing inefficiently or ineffectively, we could either hasten the investments, which could lead to higher costs for all consumers, or we could delay the investments and we wouldn't get the benefits of these new technologies. So rate design is an important component of this. And again, it touches on what Ray said. Pricing is really what drives everything in our economy. So we want to try and get that right. What I'm going to talk about is specifically the global adjustment. And as I say, I'll try and give a little background on what that is. But it's a component of the generation cost on your electricity bill. You pay for not just the cost of how much it costs to produce electricity, but the delivery costs, how much it costs to get it from the generator over the larger wires, the transmission costs, and then back down to the smaller wires, the distribution costs. My focus is going to be on the generation cost. And my hypothesis, or the point I'd like to make, is the way we currently recover the global adjustment is likely going to hasten the investment in distributed energy resources. Again, that's a good thing that we're going to have these resources and other choice, but it could hasten it to the point where it could strand costs on the traditional grid that are sunk, that we're going to have to pay for one way or the other. And so to put it another way, even if we didn't consume anything, we have these costs that we've incurred that we're going to have to pay for. If we strand those costs, we could do so, and do so in a hasty way, it could cost us all more in the long run. So we want to be careful about that. So what I'm going to talk about is a proposal, a policy proposal, of how we might want to change how we're recovering this global adjustment cost. So let me dig in a little bit more. So what is the global adjustment? So the global adjustment was created, this is a bit of a history. I'm an old guy, so I tend to spend more time on history now. The history of this goes back to 2005, when the Ontario transitioned from what was a more pure competitive market where generators had to sell their electricity into a market and consumers would buy that electricity. And based on that price for electricity in that competitive market, they'd make decisions around investing in new generation, et cetera. In 2005, we changed that structure. We created a hybrid market. The hybrid market continued to have that competitive wholesale market where generators would sell their electricity into the market, and that's for the energy services. But we also added long-term planning and conservation planning to that market. And that really took care of what was really the capacity product on the system. So having enough generation capacity available to meet those peak demand hours, meet peak demand consumption. And that's the reliability aspect of what Ray was talking about. So that was one of the changes. The other change that happened in 2005 is that prices for electricity were very volatile, and the government wanted to provide more price stability at that time for consumers. And so what they did is they actually regulated the major generator in the province, Ontario Power Generation, and set their prices. And the price would be determined by the Ontario Energy Board. And the idea here was that if prices are really high, because the market is setting high energy prices, Ontario Power Generation's rates would be fixed lower, regulated lower, and they could rebate some of the revenues they earned at the higher prices back to consumers, and that would stabilize the prices. If prices were low, they would get some more additional payments from the consumers, and again, that would flatten prices. So there was those three changes that happened in 2005. And what the global adjustment, how that came about was, it was a way of trying to give money to those generators that they didn't get or from the wholesale market. And so the global adjustment is a monthly fee paid by Ontario consumers that essentially covers the costs that generators don't get from the market. Or at times when they're getting more from the market, it actually rebates costs back to the consumers. So I'll show a graph here. And on this graph, what this graph shows is the generation costs that I was talking about in the province. There's three series. The green series is that competitive market price. It's called the hourly Ontario energy price. This is the monthly average of that price. The purple series is this global adjustment. So this is the additional payments, or maybe payments that generators make back to consumers that are needed to cover their fixed costs. And then the tan line is the summation of the two. So that's the total generation cost. And what the picture tells you when you see it is, obviously since 2005, the generation costs have been rising quite a lot, and they have definitely doubled. Early on, most of those costs were from that energy price. Most of the payments that were being made reflected that energy price, that competitive energy price. Not a lot was in the global adjustment. Over the last more than essentially 15 years, that's changed. The global adjustment is now by far the largest share of the generation costs. It's about 80% of what your bill for generation costs includes. And who makes up that generation cost? We can see here it's largely the Ontario Power Generation that owns a lot of nuclear power, hydroelectric power, and the nuclear and gas facilities. They take up the largest share of the global adjustment. They also, and this graph shows in the purple line, they also represent the largest share of capacity on the system. A little less money in the global adjustment goes to wind and solar. But if you notice, their share of the global adjustment is greater than their contribution to capacity. And that's because wind and solar really isn't a capacity resource, i.e. they're not really there in those peak demand hours when we need energy. They're there, they kind of provide other types of benefits and services. Okay, let me move a little bit more. So what's the issue? As I said, my concern is the way we recover the global adjustment today might actually hasten investment in distributed energy, and it might make it worse off for everybody. It might cost everybody in Ontario more than what needs to be paid, and there's equity issues involved here. So that's the issue I'm going to tackle. A little bit of terminology and context. The hourly energy price, that green line that we showed you, the competitive market price, that's supposed to represent the marginal cost on the system. So the cost that would be avoided if we consume, say, one less megawatt of energy. Standard economic theory tells you that if you want an efficient market, prices should always reflect marginal cost. The global adjustment, as I said, represents those fixed costs that generators need to recover if they were to build those assets, but they can't get from the market price, that marginal price. It's positive, as we saw. It's well above the market price. And what that means then is that we can't have marginal cost pricing, i.e. what is the efficient economic theory, and still get pay those generators what they need. If we didn't pay them what they needed, they wouldn't be here and we'd have issues. So we still got to pay them. What this does is it creates a new kind of pricing dilemma that we have, what's called the second best pricing dilemma, where we have to try and find a way to recover costs efficiently, but still make sure that the generators recover their costs. And this is what is kind of leading to the dilemma of how we're recovering the global adjustment. So this issue about how you recover fixed costs when marginal costs are really low is a standard issue in economics, and also in practice and regulatory practice. There's been a lot of different approaches. I've listed a few here, and there's a paper written by Severin Bornstein that I've kind of drawn on here if you're interested in that paper. But the idea is here you could use volumetric charges, i.e. pricing electricity based on how much you consume. What that often is looked at is to make sure generators recover all their costs, that price would reflect the average cost in the system, not the marginal cost, which means sometimes when the marginal cost and the peak hours is much higher to produce electricity than what the average cost is, we could get, we might actually induce too much consumption, and when the marginal price is really low relative to the average cost, we might be inducing too little consumption, so it might not be efficient. Other charges are fixed charges. You charge a fixed payment just for access in the traditional grid, and that could recover fixed charges. And we have demand charges. And demand charges are charges that depend on how much you consume during certain hours, based on your kind of peak consumption, often during hours when the system's capacity constrained. And the concept here is we should charge people for how much they're contributing to that capacity constraint, because, well, that's how we're going to build new generation. So there's conceptually something there to that too. The issue of equity really often turns to the concept of cost causality. We think that when we have to recover these fixed costs, the way we should do it is recover it based on those, and assign those costs based on those who benefited from the costs being incurred or who caused those costs being incurred. And this concept of cost causality brings up this kind of neat distinction between fixed costs that are customer specific versus fixed costs that are system-wide. Some cost, like if I I just went through this from this new house that we're renovating. I wanted to move my gas meter. A customer-specific cost in terms of what I pay my utility company might be the cost of actually moving my meter. That's specific to me. It's a fixed cost, one-time cost. That should be charged to me directly. It shouldn't be shared by someone else. The system cost, system-wide cost, might be all of the pipes that have been put in the ground that really don't change when I consume electricity or gas, or they don't change when others change gas, but they have to recover from everybody. And they're not really attributable to anybody specifically. Customer-specific costs should be charged from efficiency standpoint directly by the customer that causes them, and from an equity standpoint, that makes sense too. System-wide costs, that's where we have this challenge. How do we actually recover those costs? How do I go back here? So let me get to the nub of the problem. The way we're recovering the global adjustment today is on a demand charge. So for Class A customers, which are the large industrial customers, they are charged global adjustment based on their consumption during the 5 highest demand hours in a year. These are largely industrial customers. They're customers with peak demands on average greater than 1 megawatt. So what that does is it says, hey, there's an incentive for me not to consume during those 5 peak hours of the year. And maybe that's good, because what it means is that's when we build new generation, that's when we need it to meet the peak demand, so maybe we can avoid future demand charges. The issue, though, is that the global adjustment embeds a whole bunch of different costs. Sorry, it's not moving now. Can't get it to move. Oh. It won't go back. Anyways, the global adjustment includes a variety of different costs. We built generation over the last several years to achieve our reliability goals, make sure there's enough there to meet peak demand, but also our social goals, such as making sure that we could clean up the environment, replacing coal with things like renewable energy, as well as some job goals, such as creating jobs in terms of green energy jobs. Sorry, my thing's going off. Those issues are system-wide fixed costs, and they're not recoverable based on a peak demand charge. And so the problem with the way we're recovering the global adjustment right now is by including all of those costs, what we do is we actually over-incent people not to consume during the peak hours. And the way they're going to deal with this now, as new distributed energy becomes more cost-effective, is they're going to hastily invest, perhaps, on technologies that are still more costly than what the cost you'd avoid if you're actually using the traditional grid. And this isn't necessarily good because those costs, as I said, were sunk. And if they don't have to pay them, somebody else does, which is typically passed on to residential customers. And again, what that does is it creates this cycle that, well, then they too are going to look for cheaper ways of meeting their electricity demand. And they too will start looking to aggregators, others who are using distributed energy technologies to get their electricity system. And we'll be stuck with all these sunk costs. So this is the kind of the dilemma that we have. In the paper, what I do is I actually plot out what those costs are. I can actually break out the cost of the capacity charges by using estimates of what the capacity costs are. And what I'm proposing is that it's okay to use a demand charge for recovery of the global adjustment, but you should only recover those costs that are truly customer specific and related to capacity charges. Other charges, we should find another way of recovering those costs. That will reduce the potential for investing in distributed energy when it's not efficient, but also will create some equity issues. The issue being that the poorer consumers are those who probably spend more on electricity. And the more the customers are passed on to them, there's going to be this equity issue. And maybe we need to kind of think about recovering those costs more based on ways that we think of distributing income in the society in general. So in the paper, I proposed that perhaps, because these were incurred for social reasons, we should start considering recovering them based on some tax recovery. Anyways, I've gone over my time, and I realize that. So I'll end my talk here, and if there's any questions, happy to take them. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian, for walking us through the thicket of the global adjustment. It took even the Auditor General of Ontario 3 times, and she still got it wrong. So it's a difficult subject, and perhaps you might have some questions. Our Bissan is here. Why don't you join us, please, although you'll be the speaker after this one. Our next speaker is Chris Ford. Chris has over 30 years of experience in the energy management sector. After graduating here from University of Waterloo with his master's degree in solar thermal, he worked for small engineering consulting firms on a variety of HVAC and energy conservation initiatives. 10 years as the City of Kitchener's environmental engineer and 15 years designing and installing commercial building automation systems rounded out his experience, having been a contractor, consultant, owner, representative. He's now working here for plant operations at the university. So going from the big picture to the Ontario challenges around global adjustment, Chris understands the University of Waterloo energy ecosystem quite well, and we look forward to his remarks. Chris?
Thank you. The speakers prior have been talking about the system, the rate of the cost of the system. My talk is going to be about how we actually demand and use our power and our energy that we try to use every day. Okay? Electricity has a carbon component to it. And from the chart here, you can see that the amount of electricity, which or the carbon, which is used in electricity, is the yellow shading close to the top. And it has been diminishing over time, and that's because of the reduction of coal from our power plants. But the flip side of that is that the amount of natural gas that we've been using, and this is internal to the University of Waterloo, okay, has been proportionally increasing. And moving forward, whether it's by rate structure or by distribution capacity, we generally have to consider how we are going to be using our energy moving forward, okay? And the basic thing that we need to do is to use less energy at all. And every building that has been built at this campus from the 1950s forward has been built upon a pre-existing or traditional energy structure of it's available on the grid. It's available by distribution, and the cost is relatively small in comparison to anything else that we need to do. Well, moving forward, that is all changing. That is all changing. The redistribution and the microgrids is going to be changing all of that. And if the university decides to drop in 10 1 megawatt demand energy units, then all of that completely changes the way that we or the way that we need to use our energy, right? By the way, my talk is going to be relatively short. This is a chart or a pie chart of the complete energy consumption that we've been able to assess for the University of Waterloo. Business travel, that's a little vague. We're not sure about those numbers. But the takeaway from this is that natural gas is by far the largest carbon producer that the university uses. And that is almost exclusively required for building heat. We are Canada. It's a well-known fact that the planet uses energy, more energy than the planet receives each year. Okay? The only real energy that we receive is from the sun, and the planet as a whole uses about 1 3/4 the amount of energy that the sun provides. In Canada, we use over 5 times the amount of energy. That if everyone were to live like we do in Canada, the world would need to be 5 times, or to receive 5 times the amount of sunlight in order for us to survive and sustain ourselves. So the whole point is we need to start reducing our energy intensity, okay? And that will help out with the redesign of the hydro systems. That will help out with the redesign of the economic aspects of how we charge for receiving our electricity. Simply by using less, we make whatever kind of a problem and whatever forward-facing challenges we have, we make that problem a little bit easier to overcome. And what that fundamentally means is that every building needs to be retrofitted. We need, and unfortunately, it's not only the energy-consuming apparatuses that are there, like lights or projectors or anything else. Generally speaking, the innovations that are coming out are very, very good at reducing the amount of electricity that we use. But we have windows. And in some cases, we have windows that are still single pane. We have bricks and mortar that have not been renovated for 50 or 60 years. And these are the aspects of the buildings that need to be addressed in order to be able to move forward. The university has a target of being carbon neutral by the year 2050. If that's going to be an honest-to-goodness reality, we need to start retrofitting 5% of our building stock so that it doesn't consume as much energy as it currently does. Because if we want to get off of natural gas, which is the dominant creation of carbon, the most common way of doing that today is by using some form of electricity. There isn't enough electricity in Ontario to allow us to do that. So we would have to upscale our electricity needs dramatically in order to accommodate that. Yes, it's an opportunity, but it's a very harsh one to receive. So we're better off trying to reduce the amount of electricity that we need. This is a business as usual emissions chart. Okay. What we hope to be able to do, and what we are currently planning on, is how to take that and make it a virtual zero by 2050. It's a tall order, but we're getting started. Okay. And I'll just conclude, very short talk. I'll just conclude in saying that electricity, alternative energy sources, innovation are all going to need to be combined, complete with the energy generation, the infrastructure that is there, the province, the nation, the world. We're all going to be tackling this together if we're going to learn how to continue to live into the next century. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for helping us out with a little bit of time here. I will now call upon Bissan Ghaddar, Professor Bissan Ghaddar. She's Assistant Professor of Management Science at the Ivey Business School, University of Western Ontario. She's also a friend and a colleague. Bissan has been working on problems at the intersection of smart cities, IoT, and optimization models. Prior to joining Ivey Business School, she was an assistant professor in data analytics here at University of Waterloo in the Department of Management Sciences. She's also worked on energy, water, and transportation network optimization at IBM Research, and on inventory management problems at the Center for Operational Research and Analysis, Department of National Defense in Ottawa. She was invited for extended research visits at the University of Cologne in Germany and the University of Avignon in France. Dr. Ghaddar received her PhD in operations research here from the University of Waterloo. Her work has been published in many prestigious journals such as Mathematical Programming, SI.am, Journals on Optimization, Transportation Research, among others. Her research has been supported by national and international scholarships, including NSERC, Cisco, H2020, and the FP7 program of the European Union. Professor Ghaddar, please, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jatin, for the invitation and for the very nice introduction. So actually, the talk that I'll be talking about today really echoes the first presentation in terms how we can take advantage of data, how we can make things work in a smart way. And I will be focusing first on two key ideas. The first one is one of the most disruptive aspects that are happening in our current days is the use of the shared economy. And from this appearance of Uber, of Airbnb, of Lyft, all of these new services are encouraging us or moving from a really decentralized framework to a more centralized and more distributed type of approach. So for example, in Uber, now you don't need to own a car in order to be driving people from one place to another. You are just using Uber as a service, and in some sense also as well Airbnb. They don't have any apartments, they don't have any hotels, but they are a service that's providing customers with accommodation and places all over the world. So now, like, we're moving from owning assets in some sense to sharing these assets, and these companies are providing services to help us gear towards that. So this sharing economy type of framework is a really disruptive component that's happening out there. How we can take advantage of that is one of the key components that people are starting to look at. In addition to like the sharing economy, one of the key enablers of that is sharing data. And sharing data would provide a higher layer in terms of using data. How can we be using data in order to come up with smarter decisions? Okay? So in some sense, how we can relate that to the energy and the smart grid. So what we can or think about in terms of, can things be shared in that context? What products and services can we share from the smart grid? What technology infrastructure is needed to support this sharing? And what services can we use or can we come up with to make customers or clients really like satisfied and happy with the new or the incoming current framework that's happening? So we're currently moving from again, as I mentioned, from a more like a supplier-centric type of framework in the energy sector to a more consumer-centric market. And you can see here, like, as you can see, like now, consumers are more part of this service or the center of this service, and they are sharing, in some sense, information and data, and this part is improving the cumulative service, I would say, of the whole grid. So let's talk a bit more about each and every component separately. So what we have is we moved from this supplier-centric model to a decentralized model, where now the grid is no longer the one like in the center of the framework. So customers can share energy between each other. They can sell energy back to the grid. They can store their energy. They can generate their own energy. And how can we create business services around that is really a key factor that we're still looking into. And as the first speaker mentioned, the technology is already there. The infrastructure is there. The data is being collected. How we can join this from an energy perspective, this is a key component, because otherwise we're going to miss the train. Okay? So we need to adapt to this new decentralized setup, and we need to do that fast because things are happening. So I will be focusing here just on one particular paper that I worked on with Jatin, actually, in order to try to see how data can support such a framework. Okay? So in some sense, in the energy sector, you can share the energy storage. You can share like the PVs, which are the solar panels. You can share different components. Here we'll be focusing just on sharing the energy storage. So instead now of each and every single household owning their own storage, which is costly in terms of infrastructure for sure. And the second part, it is like difficult to then manage in a decentralized framework. What we're suggesting, or what we are trying to promote, is why this shared energy storage doesn't come to effect. First, it's cheaper in terms of infrastructure. Second, you don't need as much storage devices then in a given community than what is needed when you start sharing this. Okay? Of course, you can, as I mentioned, share distributed energy generation aspects like the PVs, different other components, and this will all provide some demand flexibility. So once you start sharing your data, once you start working with this data, we can set up energy management systems that can adjust things, and this will release the peak effect on the grid, as well as it will allow consumers to manage their prices, work with their prices, and try to decrease their costs throughout the period that we are considering. So again, as I mentioned, the key component that we're thinking about is going from like private type of energy storage to a more shared energy storage framework. How can we share that within a community? What is needed in terms of infrastructure, in terms of data to allow us to do that? What is its current impact? Okay? How will that impact my costs, my behavior, my performance in a household setting, as well as in a general community setting? So what we're trying to do is as follows. So what we thought about is instead, again, of going from one single private energy storage for a single household to move to a concept of a community. And this has been going, in the recent couple of years, this has been going really extensively. The technology is there, the mindset is there, so in the energy sector, we need to mimic such an approach. Okay, we need to take advantage of this as well. How we can take advantage of that? So creating just the concept of community, how we can share with each other. Now we come up with this like energy storage systems. So instead of single households having their private energy storage, now we will be joining households together, and these households that are shared together will be sharing their own energy storage. Okay, so how can we make the most of this setup? We will be considering in this setup, we considered like a general framework. So we thought about the strategic level. And the strategic level, you need to understand how many energy storage do you need for such a community, right? And also you need to see how to allocate these households to which energy storage. Does it make sense to allocate it randomly? Does it make sense to allocate them based on a certain criteria? So that's one thing at the strategic level. What sizes of energy storage do you need? How many of them do you need? And also these are all strategic points that we need to try to answer. Once we have that set up and we have our strategic setup, right, then we can move to the operational component. And with this operational component, because we know households are now equipped with smart appliances, smart devices, with all this IoT and data, again, collecting data, sharing the data, we can, at an operational level, now control the household's behavior by putting on and off or scheduling certain items at given points in time so that the collective cost of the community now is reduced. Okay? So we will be thinking about two setups, the strategic level and then moving to the operational level, and how the cost of going from private energy storage or private setup to a more, I would say, shared or community setup makes sense cost-wise as well as efficiency-wise. Okay, so the first step, as I said, for example, we would like to know the number of batteries or the number of energy storage that are needed, the allocation part, how we allocate households, and the capacity. Okay, and for that, we use data from collecting the power consumption of a given community, how much power are they consuming. Once we collect that and we know the household patterns, if we don't know that, we can make some assumptions there. We will start allocating them based on some machine learning approaches, which we are detecting some patterns in their consumption, allocating these households based on some patterns, and clustering them together to have a shared storage device. Okay? And that's the resource planning part. And that will give us an idea about the sizes that are needed of the batteries, and we know then their allocation, and we can know their number. The second level, once we have that set up, we now need to understand their power consumption operations, their patterns in terms of when they would like to turn on the washing machine, when they would like to turn on the dishwasher. So we will have some constraints there from the consumer side, but we can work with that and put that into our scheduling of charging and discharging and all of our operational component that comes as a second step, and try to optimize the shared cost as a community as a whole. So let's start with the first strategic component. So for the strategic component, as I told you, we have some data out there. We will be using some data that we've been collecting or that is publicly available in order to start to form communities. And these communities are as follows. So let's say we have a community of 1,000 households, and this is the one on the left. So the first step is to cluster them by geographical region. Okay, or geographical distance, let's say, because batteries have some physical restrictions in terms of the lines and so on. So the first step is to geographically cluster these households together so that we can get rid of this physical constraint. And that's the picture in the middle. So we ended up with, let's say, 3 communities in this case. Okay? So around 300 households per community. The third step would come into effect is where we are clustering now based on power consumption. So households will be clustered based on power consumption. Again, here we ended up with 7 different clusters based on their power consumption. And you can see the different colors. It means like households are assigned to the same cluster, which means that they have similar type of power consumption. Okay? And then you can start allocating these energy storage or the shared energy storage to these households within these like sub-communities, I would say. Okay, so we have 7 sub-communities. We can start allocating like energy storage to these sub-communities. And you can do it in different ways. Which one makes sense? We tried different combinations, and I can give you some intuition behind that. So one way of allocating them is just randomly, right? So taking some households within different clusters and allocating them to like a given energy storage. A second approach would be to use homogeneous type of framework, where households of the same power consumption are allocated to the same or similar energy storage devices. So then you have more a homogeneous framework, okay? And this really impacts fairness, which I'll like touch on again later on. A third approach that we thought about is the diversification. So we tried to connect for a given energy storage consumers from different power consumption patterns. And this is good because it provides us with a good and balanced utilization for our energy storage. Okay? So there's a trade-off between the energy storage utilization and the fairness. And whichever you want to choose, also that can be analyzed and that can be taken into effect. But at least the option is out there. Okay? So that's the allocation part. So now, within a given setup, you can cluster consumers. You can decide on energy storage devices that you want to allocate these consumers, whether homogeneously or in a diversified way. That's something that can be taken a look at. Once you have this allocation, as I mentioned, now you have like the operational component. So you have a household with a given a PV system, with a given thermal load, with a given provincial load, uninterruptible devices, and so on. So you know exactly what's their preferences, and then you can schedule things accordingly. Okay? And that's an optimization type of model where you're taking everything, all the operational aspects into effect, and trying to come up with the best cost for the whole community. We tried a Waterloo use case in terms of applying this setup. So we applied this up to a Waterloo use case where we took a region here in Waterloo, actually in Laurelwood area, with around 1,000 plus households. We were able to cluster them and allocate these energy storage. We have some data from the IASO website, so we took into account how the PV system would react in winter days versus summer days. So we took also 2 setups, winter and summer. So these are the lines in blue and orange. So we have energy prices that vary throughout. We have the PV system, how does it change, or how much energy can it produce in summer days versus winter days. And we know the thermal load, how it changes throughout the time. So we have this input data that's coming from one side. On the other hand, once we try or simulate that we want to include these PV systems and storage devices in these households, then things really get reduced significantly in terms of costs. And you can see here, this is the winter and the summer chart, and you can see a significant reduction in costs. Green is good, okay, especially in the summer. So the one in the summer is on the right side. So on the right side, we can achieve, if every single household has a PV system, as well as is connected to an energy storage, we can achieve around 46% in terms of cost saving for the whole community. And that's really impactful in the summer. In the winter, you can achieve a little bit less, but still you can achieve some reduction in terms of costs. So that's the first step. So going to a distributed energy resource system is really helpful. We reduce the cost of such a community. Now, if you go from a private energy storage to a shared community energy storage, that will also reduce the costs, not just the strategic costs, which are the cost of infrastructure, the cost of batteries, but also the operational cost. And you can see that in the figures here. So, for example, the figure on the top left, it shows you after this cutoff line, which is in black, everything below that is really cost savings. You are saving in terms of costs once you move to a shared energy storage. And these are for different sizes of the battery. And then we can see that, for example, if we have around 70 batteries for this community, 70 batteries and around a capacity of 120, that's a good setup for such a community and provides you with like really reduced amount of costs. And finally, just I want to touch upon this idea of fairness and utilization. So depending on how you allocate things to this battery, your operational costs, as I mentioned, are decreasing, but you also have to think about other like KPIs that you need to take into effect. Fairness, utilization of the battery, which will reduce its costs along the maintenance of its life cycle. The fairness, how would customers perceive this? Of course, they would like to have a more fair setup, and all of these allocation options will provide you with such like insights and shots analysis. And with that, I think things are a bit shifted. I'm not sure why, but with that, like I conclude. So really, what I wanted to say from this talk is data is very important for moving forward. The second part is sharing resources is becoming really a clear, impactful thing, and data is one of the key enablers for that. So moving towards a shared energy, either storage or PV system for a community really makes sense, and you can see that also analytically with the numbers. Thanks, Jatin.
Thank you, Bissan, for highlighting and I've always often said that data is the magic fundamental creator of new economic value, and we're moving into a world where that's becoming increasingly obvious. Now, we started 15 minutes late, so we'll steal 15 minutes from the next panel. There is some time for questions, and I'd like to welcome questions from the audience to any of the panel members, or if you have a question that, all of them could comment on, please feel free to step up to one of the microphones. We will have time for 1, 2, maybe 3 questions, something of that order. Please, any questions from anybody in the audience? There is somebody standing up. There is 2 of them standing up, so 1. Yes, please.
Hi. So really interested in sort of the discussion around making an electrical grid that's intelligent and that can adapt to these distributed sources. So I'm just curious, and maybe this is somewhat of an unfair question for this panel, but taking into account the University of Waterloo's natural gas consumption, how do we feel about the natural gas distribution system and its ability to reflect distributed generation of new gas resources? How does that parallel what's happening or needs to happen for the electricity grid?
Thank you. Who would like to take that? Chris, perhaps Ray, perhaps? Is Chris's mic on?
Test? We'll assume it's on. Oh, there we go. The creation of, the creation of natural gas or any sort of high-density energy source of that nature tends to take a lot of land. And PV, electricity, storage, those sorts of things can be relatively concentrated, and so they can be community-based. But having a natural gas well, if you will, located in a community and being able to take advantage of that, I think is a different level of investment than a community might be willing to undertake.
Ray, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll make the assumption. I don't know if it was specifically about storage, about the increased utilization of natural gas as DERs that could be CHP driven. Will there be capacity? And I think, yeah, the issue is going to be a balance of where both traditional providers, both in gas and electricity, we look at the needs of where major infrastructure upgrades are required versus what's the right DER solution. And in a lot of cases, we're seeing increased CHP utilization. You know, they're using full utilization of all end products, right? They're using the gas for the purpose of electricity, for heat. And in the case of where I'm from, where we have a high concentration of greenhouses, they're using the CO2. So using, I guess, the Waterloo scenario here, I think the solution would be integrated between what's the available infrastructure available to connect into Waterloo's campus here, whether it be the gas the bulk electricity system or distribution system, and then what are the right choices within your community here of this campus place that meets and where you can utilize those energy sources to their maximum benefit. So there would be probably a certain level of CHP that could probably make sense because you could drive the full utilization of electricity and the heat source year round. There's probably a certain percentage of on-site generation from solar, PV, other, that probably is a balance with the electrical side. And then there's going to be probably a portion that's still maybe best drawn from the traditional system. So to me, it's about creating an integrated plan that makes sense because saying, well, we want to become self-sufficient in electricity, so we'll just produce everything through CHP, but that means the distribution company is going to increase the pipe size across the Waterloo region from 24 inch to 36 inch, maybe not the right solution, right? So to me, the future across all of this is going to be all the different energy providers as well as the local technology opportunity that exists based on the end user's capabilities. In the case of a campus like this, you have a lot of rooftops, so maybe solar PV is going to be a real opportunity for you. But again, it's a balance between what will make sense for the end user behind their meter, their setup, their utilization, and then what are the other opportunities, both, today we're talking, natural gas, electricity. I mean, the reality is hydrogen will be coming potentially. Fuel cells that, have, they're developing fuel cell technology that use a small portion of natural gas as a catalyst to produce a large amounts of electricity. So, the technology is going to be changing. So I think it's looking at the balance of all of that.
Thank you, Ray. You outlined a number of solutions. If I may simply add to that observation, there is hope here. So if we want to displace gas, I think it can be done. First example, building Evolve 1 North Campus, is where our offices are located. Brand new office building, how many 100,000 square feet. First building in Canada, good building design envelope. Number 1 is geothermal powered, and there are solar panels all around for EV charging and feeding power back to the grid. Net zero energy, net carbon positive building in Canada, fully certified. So that's an example right here on campus, developed by Cora. And so similar solutions, whether it's a combination of geothermal, solar, heat pumps is another option that can come into play, air source or ground source heat pumps. So there's a whole panoply of solutions in place. If carbon is what we want to get rid of and natural gas is consumption to be declared, there are credible solutions around that we could focus on. Any other questions before we end the session, or any other comments from the, yes, please. Maybe we'll make this the last question. Thank you.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for being here today. So I was kind of under the impression that it seems like the kind of function of LDCs is changing, and what the responsibilities are going to change in reflection to this kind of dynamic market. Do you have to any of the panelists, do you have some sort of sense of some of the big opportunities or challenges that you see with possibly ISPs and grid management kind of working together in terms of infrastructure development?
Perhaps Ray again, and maybe Brian?
Yeah, we do believe there's going to be opportunity across all that spectrum. The amount of information that we need not just within the grid, but actually external to our grid, within the consumer's, end user's place, is going to require a whole bunch of new type of capability on the data side and on the intellectual intelligence side. The focus we want to have is we need to have a marketplace right down from the ISO, right through down to the LDC, to the end users, where we can transparently share the right information for all of us to make the right decisions and utilize and optimize resources to everyone's benefit, and then provide price signals, that's key. We need to provide a price signal so that we ask, the end user to react in a way that is in our interest, hopefully their interest, and of course aligned with the ISO, who's looking at the entire province. So that's going to introduce more people, more players, more resources than it's traditionally that you actually will see in a traditional utility model, right? So that's where partnerships are going to make a lot of sense in utilization of shared technology, cloud-based technology, other.
Brian?
Yeah, I think I'll build on what Ray said. If you look back in the late 1990s, there was deregulation, and it was driven by the idea that we saw generation became much more scalable, that you didn't need large generation, you can actually have small generation. And this created the possibility of competition. And there's an idea that, hey, if we create competition, innovation, cost savings, all of this will come about. But we believe that transmission and distribution were still natural monopolies, so we'd regulate those technologies. What's happening now is we're now finding generations even more scalable, that you can have it at the distribution level. It's creating the possibility of having competition at that level where it didn't exist before. So like Ray, I think the most important thing that we can do from a structural design standpoint is start asking, how do we figure out how to really make sure that that is coordinated competition? How do we get pricing that's down at that level? Very much like what we did at the transmission level. What's the role of the LDC? There's debate on whether it should be a regulated distributor, should it be a service provider? All these are really fascinating questions, but I think that's where the research over the next 10 years is headed. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll try and bring this session to a close now, but with perhaps an observation. So we are now looking at the challenges where we have to ask the question, what level of infrastructure investment spending required in a changing world? The changing world is where your homes talking to homes, cars feeding power back to the grids, cars as power plants on wheels essentially. All this is put together through data analytics and the power of data to actually optimize how we allocate societal capital for investment purposes in the energy system. So much is about to change, and I think for the positive. And in that spirit, I would like to thank our panelists for bringing together unique perspectives and helpful insights. So if you'll be kind enough to join me in thanking our panelists for their contributions. Thank you.